There's one unconscious crack in the majority of men's lives that nobody seems to name, and it's not something you can actually sell. The solution you cannot sell because it's something that fundamentally we have to do ourselves, and that is not glamorous online. And I know I'm starting this YouTube video with something that, like, why would I want to watch and listen to this? I actually do have to do the hard work, but this is just the reality of it. And everywhere you turn, there seems to be these problems after problems after problem with men and the issues that we face. And one of them is the male identity crisis. And I know, look, what it looks like. I am another guy online talking into a camera, speaking to you. But after 5 years of personal development, coaches, ayahuasca ceremonies, men's groups, retreats, books, all these things, and now 2 years of working with men on their mindset, what I've noticed that there's one crack that seems to be the highlight of nearly everyone I've interacted with. And the majority of them just have never had somebody stand behind them and say, mate, you are okay. You, by being a human being, are fundamentally good enough. And this is before you had to do any single thing to prove it. And now you might be thinking, you might be watching this video and say, is that it? Like, really? Is that really what it comes down to? And that's fair, because there's a whole industry of these versions of men or masculinity that we have to become. Be more disciplined, be stoic, become a high value man. But you can't become and build anything with this crack inside you that you do not believe you are fundamentally good enough. And when it comes to building a solid identity, this is at the heart of it. In this video, I'm breaking down from a Jungian perspective where this comes from, how a solid identity is formed, how you can start to build this internal level of I am good enough, so that no matter what happens outside your life, you can take the hit, you can take the bad month, you can take criticism, you can lose a client. You are still steady and sturdy in who you are. It does not knock you off or send you into a tantrum or you just lose the head altogether. And look, I learned this the hard way. I had to develop this the hard way, and I developed this the long way. And I'm going to share with you what I've learned in 5 years in this video. So a bit of a backstory of how I had to go on this journey myself. Back when I was 22, I had a panic attack in my car and I didn't really understand what was going on. So I was a manager in a 5-star hotel in Ireland. And what I trained for 6 years, I was building this career up, ticking all the boxes. I'd now been promoted. I'd also been offered for another role, which was above that, in a different hotel. But I started waking up in the middle of the night. My heart was going, I was panicking, and I had no idea why. I was starting to have these subtle moments of anxiety and panic attacks. Externally, if you looked at it, there was nothing really to be panicking about. But internally, I was falling apart and I didn't even realize it. And then one day, in the hotel, there was something that happened and all the staff got mad. They got mad at the management of the hotel. And it was something that was completely out of my control in the first place. But the feedback didn't land as feedback. It landed as something that just tore me apart completely. And I remember I got so overwhelmed, this rush inside me, and I couldn't even concentrate. I was a bit delirious. So I went to my car and I just bawled my eyes out crying. I was like, and I met this voice inside me saying that, fucking, you are useless, you're a piece of shit, you're not good enough. All of these things. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever met something like this. And it was only years later, when I was going through this work myself, that my identity had been completely attached to the external, to the career, to the going after, to the promotions, to be seen as having my shit together, to be seen as competent in my job, and to be holding that so tightly, which, like most, is how I earned praise growing up. It was like getting the grades, being very, very good at sports, winning all the time, being the top scorer. And I want to be clear here, my parents are not bad people. They didn't raise me on purpose that way. At the end of the day, the way I see it, when I look at education systems now, and even when I speak to parents, there's just a lack of education around the developmental stages of somebody. But anyway, that feedback in the hotel that day, it did not fit the image. It hit the only identity I had, which was attached to being the competent hotel manager who had his shit together, who could deal with chaos and panic, but I couldn't that day. So how does a man's identity form? Jung's view is that the boy will model himself on the father. For the girl, it's the other way around. She will model herself on the mother. So how your father moved through the world, how he handled things, becomes your first template to build yourself on. in my own work, and when I explore this with clients, it's like, what is the foundational layer there? And then from there, you start to show your own behaviors, your own qualities that are separate from what your parents operate from on a daily basis. And whichever gets reinforced, that's how that identity starts to form. So essentially, whatever gets praised, you keep. And whatever gets ridiculed, whatever gets shamed, or even just ignored, because you want your parents' approval, which is completely normal, by the way, your identity starts to get built up of the things that you believe is going to bring you in the reward, that you believe is going to bring you in the validation, rather than who you actually are. And then during this stage, your quote unquote internal fodder gets built. And I use the term built loosely because I'm just using that word to demonstrate what it is like for you. Because I know and I understand that you are not a psychology student and you probably have no interest in the therapy talk. But essentially, it's the part of the mind and it's like the internal fodder. And this actually isn't just built around your dad. Your dad is the start of the model, and then it's also built around the wider masculine field in which you grew up in. And it becomes your psychological backbone. It's where, this strong decision making comes when you see something, you commit to it, and you hold the line. It's where you say, I'm all right. I am fundamentally good here, even when the external world sees me differently. And growing up, the boy usually turns to the dad and is looking for that reinforcement that I'm good as a man. Now, here's what I've noticed, especially with guys whose dad wasn't around much, that part of the mind isn't really switched on, or there's a negative relationship to it. So there's this indecisiveness that happens. They can't essentially commit to anything and sustain it, and they live in this low hum that they don't essentially know who they are, that they aren't good enough as just who they are. And this doesn't mean they don't push on and go after things, but they're not chasing something to prove to some ordeal inside their head. They're chasing something because it is their own self-development. It is their own purpose. It's their own reason why they're here and what they're doing, because they have that center of this is who I am. I've also noticed when it is lacking or quote unquote missing, that there is this inability to go to do the things that they want to do for themselves. So a lot of the childhood stuff or a lot of the hobbies that once brought them joy has almost been forgotten about completely. And then that's where like unhappiness comes in. That's where a lack of fulfillment starts to come in. And that's where everything is tied or poured into their work, because that's where their entire identity lives. And so when the work goes pear-shaped, as it does sometimes, so do they. So what do you do about this? How would you start to develop a strong identity? How would you start to develop a strong sense of self, of who you are, what you want, where you're going? And yes, you are working, but you also have that ability to separate yourself from the work. Anything that's going on inside you there doesn't have this dramatic personal effect on you. The first thing is it's important to understand that whatever has happened wasn't your fault, but now it's your responsibility. If you're watching this video, it is your responsibility. And nobody's going to come and build that internal part of yourself. Nobody's going to come and start to reinsure you are enough, because it can come from outside there. Because the minute that thing is taken away from you, then it is attached to that. This has to start to be built from within. You have to become that man within yourself. There is no long ass retreat for this. There is no weeks of months and years of healing. No, it genuinely just starts with your internal dialogue. Whatever that old rule is attached to, you are only enough when you bring home the good grades. You are only enough when you perform well on the fields. You are only enough when you sit down and be quiet and be a good little boy. Whatever that old rule is or that old dialogue is, the new one has to shift that. No, by you being you, you are fundamentally okay. All aspects of your personality, like the goofiness that you might have, maybe the loudness that you might have, maybe the animated side of you that you might have had, that all these things within you is enough. Being human is enough. So that when something fires within you, old shame, a knock, a mistake, you catch it, you hold it into your chest and you tell yourself the truth that you are all right. Not that you got it right or you have to get it right every single time. That either way, you're good. And this also includes the stuff that you're not proud of. The times that maybe you snapped, or the times that you shut down, or you just done a behavior that you know deep down you're like feeling guilty or shame over. And what I've seen and noticed is that men are very good at piling on the shame onto that. That inner critic really comes out into them and starts to bury it more down. But instead, you just own it and speak to yourself like you have somebody on your side. Because shame keeps the behavior running either way. But ownership starts to change it. And look, if you're watching this and you're now realizing that your whole identity is sunk into the business that you're building or the life that you're building, this is where it's going to bite the hardest, because The problem isn't that you work hard, it's that the work is the only leg you're currently standing on. So a good week and you're a good man flying form, bad week you're worthless and you're spinning out with all these conversations inside your head. Now you don't fix this either by like caring less or saying fuck you, you know, whatever. No, it's really about building something sturdy and steady underneath. And a really simple practice of this is hand on the heart, hand on the stomach, and genuinely just breathing in when something actually rises inside you, breathing in and having a conversation with it and letting that out. Now, I got that shared with me by someone who has 30 years of experience working with men. Craig White is his name. If you want to go check out his channel, please do. And I am saying this, that this is how simple this has to be. It doesn't mean you have to go off and do long ass retreats or anything like that, or do years of healing, you know, very basic tools. And the more we do this, the more we become aware of the different aspects of our identity, the parts of ourselves in which that we allow, the parts of ourselves that we don't want people to see, and we start to accept them. And as we start to accept them, both from mind and body, then it starts to develop a stronger sense of self of who you are. And one thing I've consistently seen with clients is when this work starts to form, creativity starts to come on board, and they also start to go do the things that they genuinely love doing outside of work and business. Passions start to reappear, even purpose on sometimes starts to come up, and they start to question, well, wait, maybe that's a new direction I should go in. And overall, you just become a more rounded, whole, dynamic version of yourself. And that is where I say a strong identity comes from.